Thanks very much. That's great, Dara. Thank you very, very much. Much appreciated and absolutely delighted to be here today. As Dara says, my name is Roísín Doherty and I'm actually privileged to be here today. I work with SOLAS, the National Further Education Training Authority, and on behalf of SOLAS, I'm absolutely delighted to be here today. I'd like to thank the National Council for Special Education for the brilliant opportunity to be here today. Thank you very, very much. It's really appreciated. And I suppose this conference really strikes at the heart of everything that we do every day. And that's why it's really important. And we're really grateful on behalf of SOLAS to be here today. And I suppose really, also I should say to everybody out there on the live stream, delighted you could join us here today, and a wave out to yourselves. Just thanks very much for joining us at this brilliant conference. Before I start the slides, really, I just wanted to maybe talk a little bit, and it really touches on our previous two speakers' thought process and the findings of their research. So I will get into the detail of what I'm here to talk about today in a minute, but I just, when I have this opportunity, I just wanted to maybe take a broader spectrum. So I suppose really, as I said there about inclusion hitting at the heart of everything we do, I suppose really we're really talking about sustainable development goals, and we're making sure that no one is left behind. So in our job every day, that is really what we're trying to do. That is the reality that we're trying to ensure in the work that we do every single day. And I am not a specialist. I do try and contribute to the strategic direction of the VET system. And the role of SOLAS is to strategically direct the VET system. And I think that's a critically important task, because really it's collectively moving that system in a particular direction through funding mechanisms. So I'm delighted to be able to join you here today for about the next 30 minutes. So we, as I suppose, as individuals and collective leaders, can make a contribution so that no one is left behind. And I want to do this in reference to, I suppose, the further education and training strategy, and also with regard to the Adult Literacy for Life strategy, which was launched this year and launched by the Minister of Further and Higher Education Research and Innovation Science. And it makes a key contribution to sustainable development goals and everything that we do in everyday life. And again, that whole area was mentioned by the previous speakers as well. And I'd like to share with you, later on, as I said, I'd like to share with you about the routes into further education and training options that are available in every single community across the country. But before I do that, I would like to talk about the strategic foresight and what we do to ensure that our systems are fit for purpose, and that they will best serve our children, our neighbours, our friends and our communities going forward. And in particular, learners with the disabilities, and the key role that further education and training provides in that. Like, we all know the stats, and I'm not going to get into the stats today, that 4 out of 10 working individuals with disabilities in Ireland have only primary or lower secondary school, secondary education, twice the rate of the rest of the population. And that this acts as a major barrier to labour force participation, and that in 2018 only 10% of the working population is in receipt of disabilities payments. But I'm not going to spend time talking what we already know, what are the barriers and what are the issues. Really, I suppose, it's what are we all going to do as collective leaders? How are we going to ensure that there's change to the system? So that's what I would like to focus on today. Before I just go into some more of the detail, I just would like to reference that with my colleagues in the NDA. A recent study was undertaken by the OECD with regard to the inclusions of persons with disability in employment, and they set out a number of recommendations through their extensive research with regard to adult learning. And one of their key areas was to develop a comprehensive policy agenda to make adult learning systems more inclusive. And I think that's a really, really key agenda item, to make it more inclusive. And I think that's going to be critical going forward. And also that there will be a whole of government approach is needed to improve the universality of Irish adult learning system to encourage adult learning among all adults, regardless of disability, age or level of education. And a key area was that government should reach out and provide career guidance to potentially hard-to-reach learners. But, you know, what is SOLAS going to do with regard to that? What is other organisations going to do for that? You know, how can we all make a change? And I just on reflecting on that, you know, there's areas the SOLAS and the further education sector can improve on in that regard. So I suppose it's the whole concept of that every organisation can be a leader and every person in the organisation can be a leader to make that change come about as such. Now that brings me on then, I suppose, just to the first slide, which really it brings me on to the idea of inclusion for life. And my view is that it's, and the view of many other people I'm sure, is that inclusion is not about whether, you know, further education is inclusive or this course is inclusive or that course is inclusive. But again, as Rachel had mentioned earlier, the whole idea of, just moving my slide on there, just the whole idea of ensuring that there is a whole of life approach. So it's not just, you know, target for this or target for that, but, you know, Roisin, in her life, what suits best for Roisin, or Paddy or Mickey? What is the most suitable option that can ensure that there will be inclusion for my entire lifetime? So it's not really about, you know, inclusion in this course or that course, and then when you finish that course, there's no inclusion, or there's no progression, or there's no work experience that Rachel talked about earlier. So I suppose that, is the whole culture, and we talk again the whole thing about looking at culture and making sure that the culture is right. And I do believe further education has that at its actual heart. Further education is striving to ensure that there is inclusion for life at its core. So even if the curriculum is really inclusive, but if you don't have inclusion for life after your course, I have to ask, is that success? Or is it not success? And what consumes us each day when we look at the VET systems is to look at these broader goals of the individual and collective well-being. Much of our time is spent, again, which is really, really good, looking at better coordination. Again, that's a key policy agenda and principle of quality customer service across the public sector. So what way can we have better coordination? I talked earlier about everybody being a leader in their own organisation and organisations being leaders. Now, we do coordinate across up to 35 inclusion strategies, such as your National Disability Strategy, the Comprehensive Employment Strategy, and particularly, which is really, really exciting and innovative, I suppose, is linking with Healthy Ireland Strategy, the Pathways to Work Strategy, the Roadmap to Social Inclusion and Ireland's Wellbeing Strategy. So unless we steer with a purpose, the speed of change only widens inequities and divides communities. And I suppose what I mentioned at the very outset really is, what is the purpose of further education in the 21st century? But this, in my view, must be determined by well-being. And it's not just myself that's saying that. As I said earlier, I'm no particular expert, but if you look at the strategic foresight that the OECD is looking towards, they're saying education systems must serve the well-being of all individuals. So the questions we have to ask of the VET system every day is, how can we make our system better? How can we make it better in terms of ensuring income and wealth, independence, jobs, earning, food and housing, and again, training and education? But well-being involves more than just that. It involves the quality of life. Health, including health, civic engagement, social connectedness, security, life satisfaction and the environment. Education must be built into our daily lives and not seen as a separate system. And there must be a connection between work, school and your life. And I suppose that's the whole idea of your inclusion for life, as opposed to inclusion in my system or your system or the other system, that it's built around, I suppose, the individuals. Yeah, absolutely. Just moving on to the next slide there. With regard to well-being, and before I just move on to that particular slide, I just wanted to talk a little bit about, and I will get to the slides on provision in a short while, about high expectations. And again, this builds into the whole approach is that our sense of identity comes from messaging from what we receive from others. Messages about our strengths, our competencies as life learners, and our values to others. That shapes our identity. And really the point I'm getting at there is if your the expectations placed on you is quite low, probably you'll live up to those expectations. And at the age of 7, you'll probably know what your expectations is based on the perceptions that you have received from those that support you. And really, I suppose, the whole role of education and further education is to place high expectations for every single child and every single adult to ensure that those opportunities are available to you. So perhaps at the age of 7, can there be speakers for schools? Can there be, new approaches brought in, such as, speakers coming into the school, explaining what it's like to work in the industry, setting those high expectations. And I suppose I do ask you, what about yourself? How did you get here? How are you linked in here today? Was it what expectations were placed on you? And I know myself in my schooling, there were certain teachers that certainly placed high expectations on me. And I would like to think that that expectation is placed on all children and all adults, that we have high expectations for everyone. So I suppose it's high expectations and equity are key for success. The key factors for success, described as a belief in all children's and adults' capacities to succeed, regardless of their diverse circumstances and their abilities. High expectation links to the understanding that everyone has a right to be successful in whatever they choose and to be included in services and the broader community. The idea of high expectations and equity obliges all educators to act to identify and remove and minimise barriers to learning and to ensure that there's full participation of learners and to communicate a belief that we can all succeed. So I suppose really we are all creators of inclusion. And the key point there, I suppose, is that there'll be many different hurdles that we'll have to overcome, but the system must try and overcome those barriers and work as one to ensure that that is in place. So moving on then, just one particular point before I move on to the wellbeing framework and the importance of that. And we talked a lot today about inclusion. And I was recently looking at an article from Australia there, and they talked about, moving from segregation to integration to inclusion. But then moving to the new approach of I decide. And the source of that was Open Future Learning Australia. So we move to independence, that I decide what I'm going to do and I decide where I want to be. And that brings me on to the wellbeing framework, and I mentioned that earlier about how the Adult Literacy for Life strategy is embedded, and you can see there that it's actually a key indicator of wellbeing for Ireland, is that wellbeing for the individual in Ireland. That skills for life is absolutely key, because if you don't have that, don't have those particular skills, I suppose really that leaves you that you're not included in society and that you don't have the skills. And the importance of wellbeing has been recognised by government, and as I say here, an initial wellbeing framework has been developed, and this has established a well-rounded holistic view of how Ireland is performing, alongside other economic measurement tools. Over time, it'll be used across government to inform policy making, complementing existing tools for policy analysis. And I think that's absolutely amazing. I think that's absolutely fantastic that I suppose the term has been used, we'll move beyond just measuring GDP to measuring well-being and your well-being for life. And that brings us back to the whole idea of well-being for an individual, inclusion for an individual, and inclusion for life. As I say then, a 10-year strategy has been developed, and this has strong linkages. It has strong linkages to the whole of government approach to wellbeing and the individual's wellbeing outcomes over their lifetime. Skills for life and work is at the core of this particular approach. And again, I suppose, why is this particularly important? Literacy skills are essential to ensure that every individual can lead healthy, fulfilling and productive lives. It improves confidence, self-esteem, enables fuller participation in community and society, and raises social and political capital. So we talk about, options for further education and training, but if you are 1 in 2 of the population that don't have basic digital skills, so you can't actually access the websites, you don't have the resources, you're automatically excluded. So that's the point I was making earlier about, the role of, being inclusive in a system. It's actually been inclusive in a whole of government, a whole of vet system as such. So that figure is extremely high. So I suppose we have to ensure that the programmes are available to support people to gain those skills. And indeed, 1 in 4 struggle with maths and 1 in 5 struggle with literacy. So the Adult Literacy for Life strategy, which is a core element of the further education and strategy, sets out key actions in that regard and will be progressed over the next short while as such. So that moves me on then to, as I said, the further education and training strategy. And the key aspects of this strategy are a couple of areas which I'll just move into now. So I've set the context, I suppose, really the inclusion for life, the wellbeing framework to ensure that skills for life and knowledge and skills are key aspects of the wellbeing framework for Ireland. And I suppose that's the policy context. And with regard to the further education and training strategy, learner experience, easier access, more simplified pathways, and a more powerful identity for the role of education and options that are available. And the key elements is that further education is for everybody, in every community, in every county, and that progression and learning pathways are available for life and work. The key areas that we focus on, and this was based on the consultation process that we had with the strategy, is to focus on skills, inclusion and pathways. And these are critical areas. So you must have the skills and the pathway to progress and the inclusion and the inclusive approach to further education and training. And these are critical areas. It's, I suppose, moving towards making sure you have the embedded inclusive practice, that you're prioritising particular cohorts and underrepresented cohorts, that you have the supports in place in the system, and that you have, which is in place now, the Adult Literacy for Life strategy. And that then, there's a pathway into, through, and from further education and training. And for some, that could be, very quick. That could be a 2-week course. For others, it could be 10 years, because you might enter and do a particular programme of study, and you might progress from level 1 right up to level 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 over your lifetime. And that's absolutely fine too. So there's a pathway for every single learner, and there is, I suppose, options in every single community, whether that's a half-an-hour course a week or whether it's a 40-hour course per week. With regard to, I suppose, the vet system, the further education and training system, what key areas are we focusing on? And there's a number of key areas there and a number of reports that we've worked out over the years. One, again, is to try and remove the barriers. And as Dara mentioned earlier, we've introduced roughly about 2 years ago now, universal design, and I will talk about that in a wee bit more detail, but that has been instrumental, I suppose, in changing the whole approach to supports, that they're not segregated, they're not different, they're not over the side, they're actually in your everyday practice for every single person. Also, we work with regard to the comprehensive employment strategy, and we've recently published guidelines for the inclusion of persons with intellectual disability in the adult literacy strategy, and we work very closely, obviously, with the National Disability Inclusion Strategy. And also, we publish figures on numbers of persons with disabilities declaring that they have a disability in the further education and training system. But again, I would add that I suppose if we're moving to this mainstreamed approach that's inclusive, do you really have to fight to have supports if you've a disability, or could they be already included in your actual provision? Could they be already be made available, such as assistive technology available on the computer that you would be provided with? Or is that already available, and can that be embedded in the system to allow, I suppose, supports to be more focused for those that really need the supports, and also to give agency to the learner? If you speak to any learner, they don't want to be different. They don't want to be putting their hand up saying, can I have this and can I have that support? They would rather it was built into the system. And I think that's going to be key for the organisation going forward. As I mentioned earlier, the role of SOLAS, I suppose, is to work with the providers, and we do this through strategic performance agreements, and these are 3-year national plans. And in that, I suppose, what we're really doing is we're looking at the national policy context, we're looking at the learner voice, we're looking at all the research that's available, and together with the education training boards, who are the main providers of further education in Ireland, co-created is the strategic performance agreements. And I suppose when we want to move in a particular strategic direction, this is how it's actually particularly progressed. And just to give you some figures on the VET system, I suppose really there's over 200,000 places available across the system. So there's a place for everybody in that system, whether you're doing an apprenticeship, whether you're doing adult literacy or numeracy, whether you're doing community education or a post-leaving cert course, or you're in a particular skills cluster, or you're working in employment, whether you're unemployment, whether you're a school leaver, whether you're returned to the workforce, there's an option available for you in the further education and training system. And I will come to it later. There's up to 210 contact points right across the country where you can contact your local education training board to access further education and training. And just to touch, I suppose, there on the strategic direction for fostering inclusion, and I suppose, we're looking at the key areas that I've mentioned earlier, that, provision is rooted in your community, that, we focus on targeting priority cohorts, and that is, I suppose, embedded in the strategic performance agreements. Also that it was talked about earlier as well, that there's inclusive training and development on inclusion for practitioners. We built in universal design, and that we have the literacy and numeracy supports, and we have best practice guidelines to progress that. And I had mentioned earlier, and this has been a significant amount of work that we have, I suppose, worked on for the last 2 years. And again, just I facilitated the particular process. And I think this is what I mentioned earlier about having a whole systems approach and having partnerships together. This process could not have been concluded unless we had the partnerships and the strategic guidance that we received from numerous different organisations, such as the Trinity College Dublin head, who actually managed the whole process and developed the whole guides on behalf of ETBI and SOLAS, the practitioners. Our colleagues very much so in the National Disability Authority, who provided fantastic guidance and supports in the development of this area. Again, your own organisation here, the National Council for Special Education, the National Centre for Guidance in Education, the HSE, with persons with disability, the QQI, the National Disability Federation, the Department of Education, all work together to develop a framework for universal design in further education and training. And then when that developed, we also developed practitioner guidelines, and we've got best practice approaches across 7 different areas across the ETBs who had already this practice in place, documented that. And I'm delighted to say that through AHEAD, over 1,000 practitioners now are participating on the Universal Design digital badge. So there's community of practices being set up. So I suppose you always know when you're not involved in something or you're not called upon after a while that really the process has been implemented fully, and it certainly has been implemented fully across further education. And again, I suppose that whole approach to ensure that supports are built in rather than built on all the time, that the curriculum is built inclusively at the very start, and you have inclusion specialists designing the curriculum and making sure the curriculum is designed on a universal design inclusive basis so that you don't have to have the add-ons later on. And I suppose that's really a critical move to ensure inclusiveness across the sector. Just a little bit more information there on the universal design, and I took some screen grabs there, as you can see. Again, delighted our organisation ahead was supported through SOLAS to develop this website, which is absolutely fantastic. We have universal design reflective tools for practitioners. We have further education guidance and scoping documents, and then we have a full resource pack that's available. And also I touched also on about having the supports built in and having like assistive technology hive available again through AHEAD, supporting the sector to ensure that if it would assist you and help you, assistive technology can be built into the provision and into the software and the devices that you particularly use. So this really is moving us towards more inclusion, ensuring that learners do not have to, I suppose, they're able to focus on their learning as opposed to be focusing on, that the curriculum isn't inclusive or they need additional supports. However, that does not exclude that there will be a need for individualised supports as well. That certainly is required as well. And I suppose the main topic that I was here to talk about today really, I suppose, was focusing on non-learner pathways, but I did feel it would be good just to give a bit of context as to, that it is a whole of system approach. And as you can see, inclusion is a key pillar of the further education and training strategy. As I mentioned earlier, the key area is creating pathways. So lifelong learning pathways from school to vet, within vet from level 1, you could start and you could maybe be doing, unaccredited literacy, and you might move then maybe after 2 years to maybe do an accredited course, and then you'd move from level 1, I suppose, up to level 5. And I'm delighted to say that actually in conjunction with QQI, the EU Key Competency Framework for Lifelong Learning, which our previous speakers in the morning talked about, the growth mindset, those key competencies for lifelong learning are now integrated and will be integrated in the new standards for the level 1 to level 4 QQI awards. And I think that's really monumental because, again, you have the built-in inclusion into the curriculum to ensure that the competencies you need for lifelong learning are built into your curriculum. So we also then make sure, I suppose, then within VET, as I said, but then from VET to higher education, to further education options, or indeed to work to any stage, or you could be working and also availing of further education, and to ensure that there's learner pathways. And this brings me on to the key question, the further education training options. And this to me now is absolutely critical. There's up to 210 contact points across the further education system where anybody can access support from an adult education guidance and information services. And this is available to anybody who wishes to avail of this particular service. And it's one-to-one, and it works out, where do you want to go? What's your path? What have you done? What would you like to be? Yourself, the whole area of career guidance. And it will develop a personal progression plan for you. As I said, it offers one-to-one educational guidance about, where you want to be and what you want to do and where you want to be in Inclusion for Life, information about local courses in your local area and national courses, but not just courses that are in further education. There might be a course that's available through another organisation in your local area, and the adult education officers will be aware of that information because they have all the local information available. It'll help you with your applications, and it'll provide you an information on funding and supports. So, I will later on show you the different websites to access, but if you're one of those people that don't have the basic literacy, websites might not particularly be of help to you. So really, I suppose I'm trying to get the word out there, and I know a lot of people would know it already, but really your adult guidance service is absolutely critical. And the next question you're probably going to ask is, where can I find out more information about that? Well, you can certainly find that information out on the new website, www.therightcourse.ie. And on that, I know that's very small print, but I did want to put the links in on my presentation, because that, if you link in any particular one of those, for example, if you link into the Further Education Guidance Service Ulster, that'll link you to every single guidance service that there is available. And I know from where I live, I think there's a guidance service a couple of miles away, and there's actually an outreach service available as well. Because we know in rural Ireland, not everybody has got transport, so there is outreach services available there. And just to give you a little look at the Right Course website, as you can see there, it provides information on learning for a new skill or to retrain. Online courses, again, if you have the skill, the eCollege has 30,000 training places available. And actually on that eCollege website, we're actually looking as well to expand that to have digital literacy courses as well available for individual, as well as obviously the courses that are currently available from the National Adult Literacy Agency, NALA. On that website, we'll also provide you with social protection and other supports information. As we know, DSP, the Department of Social Protection, provides a massive amount of supports and information about what supports you can have. And again, then the link to the guidance, the career guidance information and planning offices that I mentioned earlier. There is another couple of websites, www.fetchcourses.ie, apprenticeships.ie, and also the Fetch Courses has a section there on courses and grants and supports available, and also www.thisisvet.ie. But if you're unsure of what you're going to do and you're not too sure, and you're leaving school, the guidance service, really, I would say to you, it'll go through that planning process that'll help you decide what you want to do if you're not too sure. I suppose it's great to access those websites if you know exactly what course you want as such. And again, we have smart choices, again, providing, I suppose, if you want to look at, different occupations, where's the growth in particular jobs, would it be good to go into that particular area or another area? Again, that gives you full information about vacancies and different occupations that are in demand. And that brings me on then to just, as I said, there's 60,000 adult literacy and numeracy places across the country. There's 60,000 community education courses available across the country that cover everything from weaving to arts to computers. And then there's obviously all the other provision as well, traineeships, post-leaving cert courses, range of different courses that's available. But I just wanted to go through maybe two particular case studies to just give an example of some of the provision that's particularly available. And I'd like to thank the National Learning Network who provided me with these slides, and I'd like to thank them for that. Further education and training funds in the region of 40 million provision in specialist training providers. And this provides you with I suppose, specialised training to suit your particular need at a pace that you would like to undergo your training in. And again, they're available right across the country, and courses from level 1 right up to level 5, with perhaps more at level 3, 4 and 5. Level 1 and 2, I suppose, would be more the one-to-one support in adult literacy and communication skills, etc. And again, through this, there would be the educational supports would be available, and then, your employment supports as well. And again, you'd be linking with the other supports that are available in other organisations as well. And then, I suppose, progression pathways. And a lot of learners who would avail of options in the specialist training providers would progress on then to maybe perhaps a level 4 employability skills course, maybe in a local further education training college, and then progress maybe to a post-leaving cert course at a level 5, and then maybe to a level 6. And And this option, as I say, is available around the country. There's personalised supports are available, and they have the supports built into your system. And again, it does the whole literacy and numeracy, your plan for your progression, and it makes for world-class students' experience across the particular system. And then this is a particular example of it. It's integrated. It is the specialist training provider, but they are funded and managed and supported in I suppose, a partnership approach with the local education training boards. And I've just shown on the slides there the individual planning process that's available. And it, I suppose, specifically it sets out a pathway for students who want individualised supports for further education and training, and includes work experience in that as well. All programmes provide individual assessments of your learning needs, planning and supported learning. And again, there can be accredited options and unaccredited options as well. And key pathways then to your local or national further and higher education providers. And this was an example of just a couple of students who have pathways to further education, and then either that or pathways to work. And we talked there about John, who opted for a level 3 access course in the National Learning Network, and then done a level 4 programme, Skills for Education and Employment with LNN. And then he progressed to a QQI level 5 with Kildare Wicklow ETB, and he's now employed in a healthcare setting. A great success in that particular programme, and again the other supports that are available. I won't go through the detail on that slide because there's far too much detail on it, but that, I suppose, outlines the various different numbers and supports and interventions available. Nearly 3,000 learners and nearly 7,000 interventions in a whole range of support areas that might be required should learners wish to avail of those supports. And again, then I suppose just a couple examples again with regard to education supports that are available in further and higher education. And the National Learning Network works across 8 further education colleges with the City of Dublin ETB providing educational supports services. And they link directly then with the access officers or disability officers or learning support or wellbeing officers or support officers, etc. And the service focuses on education assessment needs and looks at what accommodations are particularly required. Again, I suppose, as I say, over and above the universal design approach. And I suppose these supports are critical to ensure that you build up the success, what I talked about earlier, the whole inclusion for life, making sure that success becomes easy. And this whole supports the whole area of inclusion and well-being. And the second example is a partnership that we've just developed this year with Down Syndrome Ireland. And I'm delighted to say we now have 5 partnerships. We will have partnerships across the whole of the country, but for this year, we have partnerships with Cavan Monaghan, the City of Dublin, Galway and Roscommon, Louthmeath and Wexford and Waterford. And these partnerships have been extremely successful. And again, I'd like to thank Down Syndrome Ireland who provided me with these slides. Thank you so much for that. And the programme that we're running is the Latch On programme, Literacy and Technology Hands-On. This is an excellent programme. It's been run across a number of ETBs. And again, these programmes, as I said earlier, further education is for everybody. Some of these programmes might be, 12 hours a week. Some of them might be 1 hour a week, depending on your particular need. So I'm delighted that these programmes are available. But we would hope that it just wouldn't be in the area of literacy and numeracy. We would hope that it would progress to other areas as such, and obviously, people need to be supported in their basic literacy and numeracy, but we would like to see progression into life opportunities and employment, and I will talk about a particular example about that in one moment. So I suppose, yes, we're delighted that we have this partnership in place, and it helps with the whole area of transitions and moving from having support segregated to having provision available in the actual individual ETBs as such. Also, up to 84 tutors have been registered with the Down Syndrome Ireland's Moodle system to provide course materials that are available. And also, I suppose, Down Syndrome Ireland is also providing disability awareness training to key staff in those areas. So I think really we're trying to learn from other systems. And if you look at Finland, they say the further education system can't provide all the supports themselves. You really have to go outside the system and you have to look at all the other supports that's available in the community and integrate those. You know, you really need to make sure that there's a holistic approach and to use every avenue possible for supports, not just depend on one particular support. And I think this is a key example of that. And that brings me on to the example that I think is absolutely fantastic, the Work Skills Programme. And again, this has been really successful, and actually there's massive demand. We have a lot of employers, and not on behalf of myself, but Louth Meath, ETB, they have numerous employers ringing them up saying, when will the next cohort of learners be available to take up placement from this particular programmes? Because they find when the learners go out into placement, they're delighted to get employment. They always turn up, they're always available, and they really, really enjoy their job. And I suppose as well, the organisation has their whole corporate social responsibility in that as well. So massive demand for that particular programme. And that, I suppose, really finishing on time, really concludes the presentation, and I hope that has given a flavour of, I suppose, supports available in further education and training. My name is on the slide there, and I would just say to anybody out there on the call, you know, do contact your local adult education service with regard to pathways, particularly for young people, because it can be a huge issue, you know, and worry about making sure that there's a transition there. And I suppose I'll end just really with something that we worked through when we were working through the universal design, and it was just to touch on, it was a poem really by Seamus Heaney, and really he said, it's once in a lifetime the longed for tidal wave of justice can rise up and hope and history rhyme. So we all hope for a great sea change, and that justice, as I said, can rise up and hope and history rhyme. So we're all looking to see, you know, this change on the far side, and we can see the change coming, and we want to be all part of that change. So I'd like to thank you all so much, and I'll hand back to Dara. Thank you.